Hey everyone, Ash here with a news update on The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. So the new issue of Game Informer is starting to make the rounds, and it turns out it has a cover story on Breath of the Wild, and there's a lot of new information that's making the rounds now, thanks to this article in this new issue of Game Informer. And thankfully, the team over at Nintendo Everything were able to kind of collate this information and organize it very nicely and post it online for all of us to see. So I want to make it very clear, though, that there are some general world details, but there are also details for one of the game's main dungeons. So I'm actually not going to be going into any of the dungeon stuff because at the end of the day, of course, we are fans as well, and we're under a month now from Breath of the Wild's release, and we don't want to spoil the game for ourselves either. So I'm going to go over some of the more interesting general details that the article reveals, but I'm going to completely skip over the dungeon stuff. But if you want to check that out for yourself, just know that the information is out there. It's available online. You can check it out at Nintendo Everything or on GAF, what have you. So the information is out there, but we're going to stick to the general world details to avoid spoiling the game for ourselves as well. So to start off, it seems as though this article has given readers a nice little look into the development process behind Breath of the Wild, because we find out that we know that Nintendo previously made other 3D Zelda games by connecting small areas together, whereas for Breath of the Wild is one large open world game, massive open world game. So for Breath of the Wild, it seems like the development process was a bit different, and that the development team had to kind of suss out where to place things on the overworld map first, and then kind of flesh out the world later. So that's a little interesting, and you can really see that bear out in the way Zelda Breath of the Wild is so different in how it looks and feels and plays from previous 3D Zelda games. So it's clear that necessitated a very different development process as well. And it sounds as though there were teams created from over 300 developers in the team to work on specific sections of Hyrule. So this is a massive undertaking. And to now kind of go into a bit of the world itself, let's talk about stables for a bit. So I've talked about stables before in previous updates, and how there are several of them. So there are going to be many stables dotted throughout Hyrule, and these stables serve as kind of hub areas or resting points where Link can recover his health, he can rest in bed, and actually we've learned now that you can actually spend more rupees on a nicer bed, and what that'll do for you is give you an extra yellow heart the next day to work with. And what yellow hearts are, they're these, and we've seen them before, they're temporary heart containers that extend Link's health, but only until he loses them. Once he loses those yellow hearts, then he's back to however many normal red heart containers he has. So it sounds as though resting in these more expensive beds can give you a yellow heart or two to work with the next day. So there are many stables located throughout the world, and each one actually seems to be run by a distinct character. So that's a new bit of information, I believe, as well. And that might really go a long way toward giving each different stable its own kind of distinct personality. So that's pretty cool. Just wanted to kind of cover what stables are, how they function within the game. But just mainly the thing to keep in mind is that there are lots of different ones, and that's actually a great segue to talk about the horses. So stables, naturally, are where you keep your horses. Link can have multiple horses at once, not just one. Now, we do know from what Nintendo has said before that Epona will figure into the game. She'll play into the game somehow, so it sounds as though we'll eventually get Epona, but in terms of when that'll happen and how Epona exists in relation to the other horses, we don't know. But Link can have multiple horses, and each horse can have different stats, and among those are loyalty and affection, and those are actually very important, because a horse with low loyalty or like a bad temperament or low affection for Link will actually be more difficult for Link to control, and Link can be thrown off the horse and actually take damage from the fall. So it's going to be important how you take care of your horses, and you can raise their stats by feeding them and taking care of them, grooming them, things like that. Link can call horses over to him, but they have to be within earshot. So you can't just expect to go to a completely different part of Hyrule and call your horse it's miles away and have it come to you. No, it has to be around you. And perhaps the most controversial element about the horses that I actually found out about at the New York Nintendo Switch hands-on event, is that horses can be killed by enemies. Horses can actually die in battle. And that could potentially be a devastating loss if it's a horse that you spent a long time grooming and raising your affection with, and suddenly a bokoblin kills it in battle and you lose all that work. And interesting that they're really adding the ability for horses to die into the game, but that's what they're doing. So that really covers all the information we've learned about the stables and the horses. But let's talk a little bit about the game's dynamic weather system. So we know that the game, Hyrule, will cycle through various weather patterns at random as you're out exploring. And what's interesting is apparently the NPCs in the game will actually react realistically to it. And the example that's given in the article is that when it starts raining, NPCs outside the stables will actually go inside to get out of the rain. So that's kind of cool and might really go a long way toward making this version of Hyrule feel very alive and very organic. Yeah, so the world reacts realistically to the dynamic weather, and what's really interesting about this, and we've heard bits about this in the past, but there's a lot here about lightning and thunderstorms, and how you have to be really, really careful about what you're wearing, or what Link is wearing, during thunderstorms or while out in one, because if you're wearing too much metal equipment, Link can actually be killed by lightning. So you really want to go out of your way to avoid having a bunch of metal equipment, or use a bunch of metal equipment out in thunderstorms, because it sounds as though you really raise the chances that a random lightning strike could just kill Link outright, or maybe just do a lot of damage. I don't know if it's instant death or what, but Link can be killed by lightning, apparently. So this is kind of a different version of just having to really be mindful of what you're wearing and what equipment Link has on for the different weather, because as we know, if Link is in a particularly cold region, if he's not equipped for it, he'll actually take continuous damage from the cold. So you really are going to have to keep a constant eye on the weather conditions and the environmental conditions and equip Link accordingly. So that's interesting. And just kind of some general stuff about going out and exploring. And this kind of comes part and parcel with with open world games, but the difficulty can kind of randomly dip or spike depending on where you are, because you really can go anywhere you want. If you find a particularly tough area, the article says you can just go around it and avoid it until you're stronger. So that's a bit of an interesting point. Now, this is something we already have known, but it's good to reconfirm it here. Spending time by campfires does pass time. So if you need to do something at a specific time in the world, go build a campfire and sit by it, and you can pass time. There is no companion character in Breath of the Wild. Now, this is other than if you scan in the Wolf Link amiibo, Wolf Link will be Link's companion, but there's no Midna character, no Fi character, and the reason for that is apparently because Eiji Aonuma wanted players to choose their own path, which we have seen. Breath of the Wild is obviously a very non-linear, open-world take on Zelda, so it makes sense that there wouldn't be a companion character in that sense. Some other random details here. Different shields actually have different speeds for snowboarding, or shield boarding, I guess. So depending on the shield you have equipped, you might go faster, you might go slower, it might handle a bit differently. So that's pretty cool. And then you can also actually mine rocks and sell them for rupees. So that's kind of a cool thing. It really does seem as though there's a major focus on Breath of the Wild's world being organic and alive, and really letting you interact with it in a bunch of different ways. So that kind of wraps up some interesting world details. But let's move on to the shrines. So we already know from various leaks and stuff in the past that there are over 100 shrines in the game, which is already a huge amount. They're optional, but doing them they are optional in terms of story, but doing them seems to pay off in various ways. Among other things, you at least get an item called a Spirit Orb for completing shrines, and Spirit Orbs can be traded in for unknown items. So there's still a lot of mystery surrounding what exactly, or how exactly, the Shrines of Trials help you out, and how exactly they reward you, but it seems like it's a good thing to have more of these Spirit Orbs so you can get these unknown items. And kind of another passive reward you get for at least discovering shrines is that every time you discover one, that becomes a new fast travel point in the overworld. So the more shrines you discover, the more quickly you can get around Hyrule, because the more fast travel points you have. So that's kind of a cool way to expand the the area you can fast travel to as you play through the game. So I think that's pretty cool. let's talk about the stamina meter a little bit. The stamina, of course, governs almost everything Link does in the overworld in terms of sprinting, climbing, and paragliding on the parasail. And now that meter can be upgraded. There was a little bit of confusion early on, right after E3 last year, as to whether that meter would be able to be upgraded, but it can be. But Nintendo is not revealing how. So if I had to guess, I would say it probably has to do something with those Shrines of Trials. Maybe certain shrines, reward you with an upgraded stamina meter for completing them or something like that. But that would be my guess, is that it might have something to do with the shrines. So that's really what the article revealed about shrines. Moving on to the map. The map is so massive in this game that apparently you can place stamps to mark areas of interest for you to come back to later. But what's really interesting about this is that you can actually place you can place 100, and those include various symbols. So there's like a sword symbol you can place, there's a shield, bow and arrow, pot, star, chest, skull, leaf, and diamond. So there are all these different little symbols that you can place on the map to remind you to go back to places later. And this kind of reminds me of Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks, actually, where you were able to actually draw or use the stylus to write little notes for yourself on the in-game maps, so to mark areas of interest or mark treasure chest locations. So that kind of seems to be a bit of a holdover from that, and with the game world as massive as Breath of the Wild seems to be, I can definitely see that being super helpful. So really, just to wrap things up, I guess a few minor, not really story details, but there's no context for this whatsoever. But apparently, Zelda can get angry at you and scold you. I don't know exactly for what. I don't know, how this works. But apparently at some point you can do something that can get Zelda to be angry at you. It's probably like a temporary thing, but I just thought that was kind of an interesting point. And this is something that Aonuma has touched on in the past, but players can actually see the ending without experiencing everything from the story. So while we don't know yet exactly how the game is structured, this does kind of reconfirm that if you want, you seem to be able to go straight to the final boss and take it on without even doing anything else, or at least without doing everything else. So again, you can actually go see the ending without doing everything in the story. Whether it's the same ending you'll get if you were to do everything, that's up for debate, who knows, but still an interesting point. And finally, the last thing I want to touch on here is that it says a certain element was added to the game to make for a more cohesive storyline. Who knows what that means? We could go in any number of directions talking about that, but I still found it interesting, and so really, we've learned so much about Breath of the Wild from these details, but really, some of those details ask more, or really ask new questions more than they answer old ones. So, really, what the main thing to keep in mind going into Breath of the Wild's launch in less than a month is that even though more and more details are coming out, we still don't know that much, and it's very exciting. And keep in mind, there are additional details that you can go look up right now online about one of Breath of the Wild's major dungeons. We're just not going to get into that here because we don't want to spoil ourselves, and we want to give you guys the choice, to go check that out if you want to, or if you don't. So, that about wraps it up for this news update on The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. So as always, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and consider following us on social media. You can find all the links you need in the video description below. Otherwise, keep it on GameXplain for more on Zelda Breath of the Wild and all things gaming. Until next time, everyone, bye!